My very first job, you're gonna laugh. I worked at a cyber cafe.
The Josh Ten Show.
Hi guys, welcome to today's show. We have our regular guest, Sumin.
Hey, guys, how doing?
Hey Sumin, today I wanted to get your thoughts also on some very interesting interviewee answers from Torres Pitt. He did a very viral video clip on that $10,000 starting asking price for students. Have you seen that also though? Because it's like super
Yeah.
viral.
Yeah. It definitely sparked a lot of reaction. I think for the average person that understands what people earn, they look at that and they say it's crazy. But what's fascinating is that I like to go on Reddit sometimes and I see reactions. And there are rationalizations of why 10,000 might not be so far-fetched for certain people. Because what they were saying that obviously the clip was edited for drama.
Yes.
But sometimes so somebody was asking, it's like, hey, what student is this person? What did she study in particular? Because in certain roles, like if you want to go into investment banking, 10,000 might not seem like such a stretch.
It's possible, what? It's like the cream of the crop can get in, but it is definitely possible. And who knows, maybe she is really cream of the crop.
Exactly. Obviously, we love to hate on
Yes.
So where got such thing? No, impossible. Blah, blah, blah.
Definitely. It's like that emotional part, that jealousy part. It's because most of us don't get 10,000 starting pay. And to hear such a big number, it really triggers us to think about some insecurities that will come out. That's why I guess, also in foreigners. Then I've also seen another viral article that shared about living comfortably in many countries. One number came out in Singapore, which is about $1.1 million, and Malaysia, which is a quarter of that. That's something we covered in a previous episode. What are your thoughts about retiring in Malaysia? Because you have definitely some experience in there.
When we think about retirement, there's a lot of factors, but I think maybe one of the big ones that's hot now is, of course, property prices, right? Like that is a major component of retirement, like whether or not you can buy a property and then continue to live and have a reasonable lifestyle after that kind of major expense. I think the one thing that I would say Malaysia has a bit more flexibility on, of course, is you have greater options in terms of property choices. Yes, if you want to stay in KL, you'll be paying premium lah. Full stop. It's hard to avoid that. But even within KL or Selangor, you still can find some things that are, I guess, more reasonable. Of course, the more you are willing to sacrifice the conditions, the prices will go low. But I think the point is there is an option for you. And this is just within KL. And of course, if you want to extend your reach, you don't want to stay in KL, you want to go to a smaller kampong area or another state, you have these options.
Because you studied in Malaysia, right? Do you have school friends that went to other parts of Malaysia, eastern side especially? Well, I always imagine it's a bit more rural.
Of course, from a business standpoint, KL is the hub. Then nowadays you do have other market centers, whether it's Johor, whether it's Ipoh, maybe not so much, but Penang is definitely an up and coming market center. So it depends on, again, your ambition and maybe perhaps which company and where they set up your operations.
So jobs wise, if I hear correctly, are all these major cities, not the Terengganu, Kelantan, that side is still definitely more rural in many ways, but standard of living is cheaper. And if you like
standard of living, okay, here's the thing: it is cheaper, but you would be surprised that it's not that much cheaper. It's not like radically, like it's not like 50% cheaper, and then you go there, you feel like a rich person. Like what in KL, you go to Terengganu, you don't feel like, oh wow, I'm loaded. It is cheaper, yes, but not by that huge a quantum.
Maybe next time you can share a bit more whether you would indeed, because right now you just bought a house, so settled that. I do understand that. And this article also mentioned a few things, like they put there Singapore's retirement amount, Malaysia's retirement amount for an American, but they didn't specify Hong Kong. Of course, I know Hong Kong is part of China, and China is so big, rural areas even more than in Malaysia, simply because of land size. And that number of 380,000 for China definitely cannot be applied for Hong Kong, which we all know, and what Torres has mentioned is very similar to Singapore, if not even slightly more expensive than what we have. So in today's discussion, we'll be sharing our thoughts on Torres Pitt, who actually interviewed 7 Singaporeans, asking them how rich they are, and they range from young to old. He started by saying that Singapore and Hong Kong have similarities, but in Hong Kong, it takes 23 years to save up for a property. That expensive, which means really you can't retire early kind of a perspective. So, what do you think of affordability, maybe in Singapore? Because Hong Kong side looks bad. What's your gut feeling?
And this might sound like it's going to be an unpopular opinion. I think in particular in this environment. Again, my context is of course coming from Malaysia as a worker in Singapore. When I look at your BTO system, but basically HDB's ability to try and keep prices at a certain level, and not only a certain level, but at a certain quality. I do feel that access for when I say the average Singaporean, somebody who's gone through the system, you follow the discipline path, you get married at the right age, you had the right income, you get the right grants. Accessibility to property still feels like, wow, there is a system here to help. Now, of course, it might seem like an unpopular thing because right now, even at the basic level, it is getting higher and higher. So I guess from an outsider's view, it does feel like at least there is a system to try and help.
So if I hear it correctly, in Malaysia side, the government is not so structured in how to push houses, good quality houses to the masses.
Not at all. It's basically you are left to your own device to figure it out. If you are from a very low income band, then there are certain other avenues. But if you talk about, again, that average worker, you do not have access to those type of units.
Wow. So in Singapore, just to add on a bit further, government actually has a lot of grants. Recently, they increased that. So if you are a super low income family, it could be $100 or $1,000 grant just to offset that purchasing price. Sometimes we are blessed and we don't understand that it's not experienced everywhere in the world. Even in Hong Kong, where Torres Street has shared 23 years to fully pay it off, that is really, really a big number.
I mean, I don't work for the government, but I mean, as an outsider, it feels like, wow, Singaporeans have this, it's amazing.
Because Hong Kong houses are very expensive. Torres Street has also shared that 7 million, of course, is for the house itself and 1 million to retire. And if I translate to Sing dollars, it's 1.38 million in his perspective, slightly more than Singapore. Yeah. So let's move on to the first interviewee, who is actually a 30-year-old guy. He mentioned that he owned a HDB flat. So since 30-year-old must be he's either married or he's living with parents. And his first comment over there is work till die. I think a bit pessimistic, maybe.
I think that pressure to feel as if like, oh my gosh, it is, first of all, you incurred a large loan. And you feel as if like your income is struggling to first of all repay it in an environment where interest rates are going up. And unfortunately, because of an inflationary environment, you see your cost of living going up as well. So in today's context, it really is. It is not hard to imagine why people are pessimistic. We are feeling the stress that our monthly income, where we could maybe afford a little bit more comfort, now it is less. So it feels stressful. So that's why I guess work till you die feels like, oh my God, that is the cloud over our heads today.
Because it's like you earn income, money comes in, then you feed your expenses. And inflation just inflating everything from groceries all the way to food prices. In that perspective we are in a treadmill or rat race. Make money, spend money, make money, spend money, and work till die. But hopefully, he can hear a bit on financial independence, retire early, and understand that if you are frugal, you can save up, and maybe you don't need to work till die. Maybe you can aim to work to 50, 55, and it's possible that you have some nice years of golden retirement. Then they also mentioned 1 million needed to retire in Singapore. From a 30-year-old guy, what would you critique on that comment?
Okay, so this is interesting. I've seen many different interviews similar like this where people ask the question. It's a popular question, right? How much do you need to retire? And this 1 million figure, strangely enough, is also the same figure in Malaysia. A lot of people will just toss that number out. And this is my perception. I do feel that it's a nice round number that people like to quote. But whether or not it reflects reality for them as the individual, I don't know if many of the respondents truly understand what that figure is. And this is not a knock on them. Because especially if the younger you are, it is harder and harder to imagine a future that's so far away. So you just quote a number that you think, okay, I will be comfortable with that. But I think there is a gap in, again, what I think and what is reality that can be closed with a little bit of interest and a little bit of education.
Good point. It's always a number to toss and hide behind it. Maybe he's pessimistic, can't hit that, or or he hasn't really calculated based on his expenses how much he really needs. I do hope he has some plan to eventually reach there. Because it's true, Singaporeans, some of them have not started planning for retirement even. And once they think of 1 million, they might get discouraged. What are your thoughts on such a point of view?
One thing is to quote that large number, and this is not just my opinion, that I think there is a gap of awareness and of what is the issue, or rather what is the gap. OCBC Financial Wellness Index that came out in 2022, I think it's statistically significant. So it is not just a small sample size. A majority of Singaporeans, unfortunately, do they underestimate how much they actually need in retirement. And the other kind of interesting statistic is that if you talk about a plan for retirement, supposedly in the research, they say that 68% to 70% have a plan. But there are limitations to what research can do. If you ask these people really face-to-face, what is that plan? I'm not entirely sure what it is. It doesn't mean that I bought a product and therefore I have a plan. Maybe, who knows? But what I'm hoping is that for those that do have a plan, first of all, they need that awareness. Like, I'm aware this is the cost of living that I need to work towards in my future. And that, I think, is probably the more important thing, that awareness.
I think a lot of times, if you don't know where you want to get to also, it's very difficult to plot the map. Yes, you may throw a $1 million figure there. You haven't done the math, but somehow your friends or media has been telling you need $1 million. Then yes, you have a plan, and then you kind of map it out one step at a time, project out how you want to get there. If you feel that you can't get there, then it's time to look at reality. What can you change? Or what's more realistic? So you don't procrastinate. Maybe that's a very important point. Don't procrastinate and start taking whatever small steps you can. Even if you can get to 750,000, it's still going to be a decent size that as long as you trim some expenses, you can still retire. It's not like a fixed number. You don't have 1 million, you can't retire, you got to work. It's not true. It really depends on your expenses.
No, that's exactly true. And I was going to ask this question maybe at a later point, but I think I've seen this in some of my ex-colleagues and all that. But when they think about large numbers like that, 1 million, if you're just starting out, it's very daunting. It's very, very scary. And sometimes people switch off because of that.
Yes.
Because they go, wow, no way in heck I can accomplish that number. So why bother? Why try?
Correct.
And I think that is unfortunate. But I'm not sure what the solution is, but maybe it might turn to ask you, if you have experience working with young adults, how do you overcome that fear and then on top of that, inaction?
I would think my first answer to that is you set milestones that are attainable. It's just like when you do any goal. If right now your bank account only has $5,000, without $1 million, you feel disheartened. You think that you're talking cock, like it's a waste of time. But if you set your milestone $50,000, then how to get there? And then you can map it out step by step. My challenge to them usually is build the first milestone, 50,000, then six-figure pot, 100,000. Once you get there, you get into that momentum. Then you start to surround yourself with friends who also have saved up their amount, built up their amount, invested that amount. Together, you would have a roadmap how to get to $1 million. So for anyone listening, if you are still at a very starting point, don't get discouraged. Map it out slowly. Get to milestones, and then have faith that eventually you'll reach a different network of friends who have seen different numbers also. Then you grow. You will grow to there, and you just need to focus on your immediate milestones.
Great tips. Yeah.
I think that can also be applied to the second interviewee. One has mentioned that she's going to get married soon because Torres P actually quizzed her about Singapore's housing, right? So she's mentioned that as she's awaiting a house, congrats to her also. And once she produces the ROM, she can get her keys, maybe in the BTO in a couple of years' time. This is under the fiancé scheme. So Torres P has actually shared that in Hong Kong, his friend has waited for 20 years. I don't know if that's an exaggeration or because 20 years, you'll be 50 years already.
How to start family.
How to start family, exactly. Maybe that's a super rare exception. So for myself, I actually bought my house in 2011 June. My wedding was September 2011. So it's true. I applied for the resale flat, then gotten it, did renovations, and after wedding, I moved in. So that was my own story. So Min, how about yours?
Actually, funny coincidence. I also got married in September, and we also kind of roughly followed the same path. I think in my case, slightly different because me and my wife, we are a little bit on the older side. I think when we got married, and this literally happened last year, and then that was, I guess, everything timed very nicely. But yeah, I think the decision to go to buy was of course a challenging one given the property prices at the time as well.
How do you broach that topic? Hey, we should go and buy a house, because young listeners don't know how to mention this very serious topic. Youngsters nowadays when they date, bring up house. Mine is too long ago, so I want to quiz you this hard question. How do you all get to this consensus? We should get a house ready.
Yeah, I think this is something that it's easy to take for granted. That again, if you follow the Singaporean path, the normal path, you go through the BTO process, blah blah blah. It's a given that you should buy a house. I think for me, because I'm out of context, I'm coming in here from overseas. I feel as if that wasn't a norm, just like the baseline. Definitely, I'm going to buy a place, especially Singapore is expensive, right? So I think tabling a discussion of like, okay, what are the needs that we have? Like, why do we want to buy a place versus rent? And this one it boils down to you and your spouse and your partner. I would say that if you are going to build a life with somebody, I hope that you would have the openness, honesty, and confidence to talk about those needs. And I think sometimes through the discussion, my one tip is that you might realize things that you might not have thought of before. So I'll give you my specific example. I was actually coming from the perspective of being a renter, but I think what I did not consider, and only after our discussion, is to realize that, look, we are obviously going to age at one point. Do we want to be, let's say, 70, 80 years old, and then one day the landlord says that, nope, you got to get out of here because of whatever reason? And I found that emotionally very traumatizing to think about. So for me, that was actually the thing that pushed me over the decision. And actually, yeah, it makes a lot of sense, even though it's painful in the environment, but let's go ahead and let's make a purchase.
If I hear correctly, it's communicating the future, correct? Thinking about a future together. And some worries in future, if you're old, you don't have a nest, you don't have somewhere that's permanent, that fear would strike hard. When you're young, it's okay. You can always move overseas. But imagine when you're older, you don't want too many changes in your environment. And that's where the fear...
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. And I'll give you an example. Right now, it's happening. Like I have so many friends who are telling me rental prices have gone crazy. And it's, in my view, borderline unreasonable when a landlord says that, okay, you are renting it at 3.5, I'm going to charge you now 6.3. This has literally happened to a friend's brother.
This is true.
And this is true.
Yeah.
Imagine if you were not so lucky and maybe he was in a good income situation, he can take that, But if you were, again, a retiree and you had your rental suddenly nearly double, it will completely wreck any form of retirement plan unless you're already super loaded. It's very hard. It's a reality, unfortunately, that we have to think about.
I think that part is really experienced in many foreign workers and expats over here. That increment in a budget needed, $1,000, $2,000, or even $3,000 just to pay for extra rent, is definitely going to bite hard in the books. And definitely, we should again, be grateful that Singapore government can provide cheap housing. You don't need to be very well off to afford your first house, and you can move on in life rather than face that fear of having to rent just to start a family and stuff. Which moves on to our third interviewee, who's a 24-year-old guy. If not, he actually is interviewed with his girlfriend. Sounds like they just started dating and not too committed, to answer such tough questions. First thing he mentioned is one kid, $1 million. Maybe I'll take that question up first, because I have 2 kids. So if I were to agree with him, 2 kids, $2 million, then give up already lah. Then families with 4 kids, then how? Impossible already. So friend, maybe not that bad. It's definitely how we approach spending for them. If you want the best schools, best clothing for them, definitely you might need a lot of money. But it's not true. Kids shouldn't be measured also on a money basis. They provide a different flavor to life. And then his second question that he answered is, how much is his expectation of housing prices? He seems to be very savvy, mentioning that houses go upwards of $500,000 in resale market, which is true. Most places, even in outside core region, Punggol and stuff, prices of $500,000 is really experienced. If now Sengkang is going to see his first $1 million HDB flat, 300 to 400,000 for BTO, which is cheaper. His girlfriend has mentioned 7 years waiting period. Wow. What are your thoughts on this couple's perception of their future life, possibly?
I think like you rightfully put, the kids' conversation is probably a double asterisk over there. Maybe like you said, they have just started dating. He's obviously very young. Considerations are the aspect, but even further. So like the housing one is probably the more realistic. Like you pointed out, he kind of accurately judged that. I think to me the implication of a waiting period is quite real. Like how does a young couple think about that? When you're a young adult, and this is something, again, as a foreigner, it feels like it's a very tall ask for an average young Singaporean to think about life so far in advance. It feels like 2 years already very difficult, but then now it's stretching longer and longer because of the waiting time, right? 7 years does feel challenging, which puts the pressure again on probably being as open and as possible with your communication. I don't think there's an easy answer to this. People change, especially if the younger you are, you will go through your evolution. But the only way to try and navigate that is through open communication.
I think if they only started dating, then talking something that's 7 years and a big commitment, that definitely scares the hell out of both of them. That's what I imagine also. This part of open communication, planning ahead, and hopefully government is working on plans to shorten this BTO waiting time. I think there's some articles also. And hopefully it won't be 7 years as what is mentioned by this lady. So let's move on to the fourth interviewee. She's a student. It looks like she's in secondary school or maybe JC and stuff. Maybe 15, 16 or 17 years old. And the question that Torres Speed has actually asked her is, how much do you think she needs for retirement? She blurted out a number which is 500,000. Way less than the first interviewee. So I really think what are students taught also in school? Do they think 500,000 is a lot, or what is the perspective of financial literacy and retirement?
Yeah, I actually think it's a question that not necessarily appropriate because I think the concept of retirement, yes, it's true in principle. We should start as early as possible to think about it. But when you're a student, I think it's like you're taking in a very advanced level concept to really chew on and think about. Which begs the question of, like, when we think about financial literacy, it is a very big cloud. There's a lot of different components within it. I come from where the schools that I've been to never have ever talked about any form of financial literacy. I think there needs to be a meaningful thought about what makes sense to teach. I don't think it's reasonable to try and do everything, all the concepts in the world for a young age person, because a lot of things will be too far removed. So the question in my head is, what would be like one key topic, like a key concept of financial literacy that we believe a young adult at a student age, right, can accept, they feel is relevant, and then it helps to build the snowball of financial literacy. So I don't know what the one concept is, but maybe
I would think you'll be budgeting maybe. For someone young, start with that first. How much money comes in? Please don't overspend more than what comes in. That's the first concept. Then how to make this money work? What are the institutions? How the finance system works? So budgeting maybe it's a more digestible size of financial topic. And of course, I agree with you fully there. Asking someone that young on retirement really puts her in a hard spot. She hasn't even earned her first paycheck and being asked about what it is to be at the end of your career. So start with budgeting first. Maybe that will be a very good starting point. And be frugal. Value money. Know the prices of things. Why are things priced that way? I think these are little concepts that I guess schools can definitely play a part in helping to educate.
I fully agree. I think that I'll also build on what you said, the value of things, right? I think one important realization for me, as I'm trying to remember back when I was like 17, 18, I started doing a lot of part-time work. That was when I first experienced like, wow, I have to work so hard for 1 hour, 2 hours. I earn so little money. My very first job, you're gonna laugh. I worked at a cyber cafe that paid me 2 ringgit 50 cents an hour.
Just to
You
turn
do
on
the
the
math.
switch or login
It's
access granted.
Yeah, I mean it's a joke. I mean, from an SG Singapore dollar standpoint, it's literally less than $1. It's like slave
It's true.
labor. It was a long time ago, lah. But at the same time, it made me realize that, oh my gosh, I work so hard. I work the whole day, 8 hours, right, at the cyber cafe. 24 ringgit. What am I gonna do with 24 ringgit? So it made me really think about, wow, how precious it is before I spend the money so easily, right? How precious it is to really appreciate the value of it.
That's a good point. The hard work needed to derive that money. Money is not given to you from your parents and you squander it. There is a certain trade-off to bring in that money first. So it took your parents some work, then you may not appreciate that money that's being given to you. So students nowadays are being taught like budgeting, your weekly allowance and stuff. I think some experts have also suggested work it from young and know that it's not from the tree. So don't use your credit card and tap unnecessarily because there is a price to pay to things. Let's move on to the sixth interviewee. And this uncle is on a totally different life stage. Fully retired already, it seems. I think he's 80 plus. He's mentioned that he owns properties. He was a developer previously. That sounds a bit like a bragging exercise. But he's also mentioned that, he doesn't worry about money. To quote him specifically, I don't know where my money goes. It sounds like he has a lot of income sources. I hope he has. But he definitely is trying to suggest that he's well off and he does not have any problems with retirement. What are your first thoughts on some of his comments?
I think he's very fortunate. If he's in the position he's in, maybe he's planned it out already to a point where he doesn't need precise awareness. He has general awareness of what his lifestyle expenses are. Maybe he has recurring income that he just knows, like, look, my bank, I just need to look at my bank account. It's not going down below a certain level. I'm okay. I don't need to know where my money is going. If you can get to that level in life, you're very, very fortunate. So I think for him, kudos. If it's true, good for him. But which brings back the question of like how important is awareness. And what I do hope is that for us, there are more regular people that really need to look at your budget. I think having proper awareness is probably an underrated thing. And I'm going to quote a shout out to another podcast, which I really listen to a lot. It's called Rational Reminder. So they were covering a topic called basics of personal finance. And one of the things was about budgeting. And the realization is a large number of people that those guys interacted with have a general awareness, meaning they lick their finger and they estimate, okay, I think I spend 4,000, for example. But more often than not, they tend to underestimate their real expenditure. So the reality of expenses could have been closer to maybe even 8,000. So the quantum of underestimation can go up to 2 times. So that means that if you haven't yet developed the habit or the skill of being aware of your expenses, I would encourage you to take that as step number 1. Be precise or be more precise about your awareness of your expenses.
When I hear you mention that, I think it sets off some alarm bells in me. If someone is too far from what they can guess in their expenses, then they seem to be probably overspending. Because if you do guesstimates, you should be fairly close. 80-20 rule, yes, you don't need to know exact numbers, but you shouldn't be too far away. If it's 2 times, then I think some bad habits may have been built in already.
No, I agree. If you were living probably, like, say, month in, month out, let's say, for example, your expenses are really just like neck to neck with your income, I think it's probably you will see it very clearly. As in you will overspend, right? Because you will start to see like basically nothing is moving. But I think in situations where if you are fortunate enough to have your expenses generally lower, I don't know by how much, but generally lower than your income, your stress might be like, hey, how come I can't save as much as I thought? Because your awareness level is not so precise. So you're like, hey, I thought I could have saved X amount, but then I end the month, but then I don't know where it went.
Yes.
I think that is for people within that band. I think that's where they're developing the precision of the thing can help move them to the next level of saving.
It's time to plug in some numbers and be more accurate. So once you are maybe overspending or out of line a bit, not saving much, it's time to rein in and micromanage a bit more. Look at details a bit more because details matter. So once you are good it's like with any game, any sport. Once you're good, you may not need to focus too much on little details, the foundations. But if you think you need to make changes, then drill down on specifics. Now, to end things with, Torres has actually suggested that Singapore, while housing is expensive, the food is super cheap. He went to Maxwell Market. I also like to visit that place. Very crowded. And he just brought up, some kangkong dish. And he said it's 30 Hong Kong dollars. And that price cannot be fetched in Hong Kong. Indeed, Hong Kong's food is expensive from my last trip over there. What are your thoughts on cheap food in Singapore? Is it really underrated as a rounding point?
I do think so. Okay, nowadays maybe you can complain a bit more because you do see like my chicken rice downstairs has gone up already. It's very visceral when you see those type of things. But if you ask me, is there still options? There are still options. And we have not even gone to the whole, can you cook for yourself?
Yes.
Can you manage your own budget? I think my final parting point would be, if push comes to shove, we control what we can control. And I do think food expenses is one of those. Beyond housing and maybe transportation, food is likely your next largest expenses. So you can think about that and how do you manage that?
But the hawker centers part, sometimes if we compare even to Malaysia, I also realize that their hawker food or their street food is not that much cheaper from Singapore. In some ways, our infrastructure of hawker centers are a blessing. Because if you compare quite simply with Malaysia, like, I realize that gap already.
Yeah, definitely. And especially now when things are going up.
Hey, thank you, Su Min, for stepping in for today's chat. Hopefully everyone listening in picked up some pointers or have some thoughts that can reshape your own finances. As always, smash the like button, smash the subscribe so you can keep tabs with us when we make our next podcast. We'll see you in the next video also. Take care.
And take care, guys. Bye.